coming up Isaya Kisekka from UC Davis. Isaya originally from Uganda, but has been in the United States for 13 years now, 13 years, and has did his master's and his PhD, if I remember correctly. I clicked on it. Yes. Oh, at Florida. Thanks, in Gainesville. I was more excited at the fact that after his degrees, he went on to become a professor at Kansas State University, where my in-laws both taught, and where our former applied ecologist was from. And we noted walking around campus about the comparison of Chico to a real Midwest college town. It really feels like it. I asked him a pointed question based on when I first researched him to invite him to come here. I was really impressed by the laboratory, the kind of work that was going on with undergrads, graduate students, postdocs, and the research. It really is a mix of sustainability in the eyes through agriculture and hydrology. And so I asked Dr. Kisekka, is he more of a hydrologist or ag? And he said his master's degree was in agricultural engineering. His PhD was really more in hydrologic sciences. So it's truly a mix of both. And so I'm real excited because, as we all know, living in this area, this is major, major issues for now and moving forward. So real appreciative that folks are spending their time studying this. So thank you.
Thank you, Russell, and thank you everybody for making it to my seminar. The title of my seminar is Sustainable Agricultural Water Management for Enhanced Productivity and Environmental Outcomes. As you know, California is the #1 state in the United States in terms of agricultural value. In fact, the next state, which is Iowa, is half the value of the produce that we produce here in California, mostly because we grow high-value crops, and we have a unique Mediterranean climate that other people don't have. But our challenge is how to balance this really unique agricultural system with our environment, because we want good environmental outcomes and we want sustainable food and crop production. So I will start by giving an overview of agricultural water management in California. What are some of the issues and what are things that people are doing to address those problems? And a few selected projects from my research group that undergraduate, graduate student, and postdocs are working on, and some of our future research. So there are many definitions for sustainable agricultural water management, but I like this one, the use of water to optimize agricultural production while addressing environment and human health. Why would we be talking about human health when we talk about agricultural water management? Because if we don't manage our water very well, especially, for example, in the Salinas area of the Central Coast, you tend to have a lot of outbreaks of disease and other things that are sometimes related to runoff nitrate water quality. E. coli is a big one. And then when you talk about water management and sustainability, there is always a conflict which is related to scale. The way a grower sees sustainability of production at a farm scale sometimes is in contradiction to when what you want to optimize at a basin or watershed scale. And so the challenge is to find something that is equitable for the growers and society as a whole. So if you tell a grower you should reduce your water use by half, you're essentially telling them to take a pay cut of their income. But as society, we need to conserve our aquifers for future use. If we practice sustainable agricultural water management, we could have very positive outcomes that I think everybody would agree with. Economic and environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and increased resilience to climate change. So feel free to stop me if you want to make a comment or there's something that is not clear. I will focus a little bit more on groundwater than surface water because my work tends to be in the Central Valley, where a lot of agricultural production relies on groundwater in varying amounts in different years. So on average, groundwater accounts for about 35%, and this varies. If it is a wet year, for example, the average is about 21%. If it's a normal year, it's about 29%. And the dry year average is about 35 to 38%. So growers tend to use groundwater as an insurance policy. When they have surface water, they pump it. When they don't have, we had, I think all of you remember, we had a multi-year drought recently. And there was a lot of wells, a lot of growers put wells into the aquifers. And we started, what happened, does anybody remember? We had subsidence, we had groundwater overdraft. Yes, the San Joaquin, yes. So this prompted the state to start really pushing regulation. By the way, California in this regard lagged other states in the US in terms of managing groundwater. I worked in 4 years in another overly drafted aquifer called the Ogallala Aquifer. Does anybody know about the Ogallala Aquifer? It's the largest aquifer in the US. And in California, we are lucky because our groundwater recharges. Some of the water in the Ogallala is paleo water, so it doesn't recharge. It's like oil. When you pump it,
they use the center pivots.
Yes, they use the center pivots. So it's really in a dire situation. So they have a system of water rights which is similar to a property right. So in California, as we'll see later in the presentation, there are now laws to govern groundwater pumping. But really the big ones, the risk to salinization. All of you are geologists, I'm sure you probably know this better than me, but as our groundwater depletes, the little that is left in the aquifers tend to be more saline than the water on top, right? Because it spends more time interacting with the geological material. And we're also using very efficient irrigation systems, so we are really leaving a lot of salts in the soil. And long term, this is going to be a major problem for us. But these numbers change depending on where you are in the state. For example, here in the Colorado River Basin, groundwater only accounts for 99%. But if you're in the Turale Lake Basin, it's about 53%. So groundwater is a major factor in crop production in California. The graph here on my right shows, sorry, there's something cut off, but this is precipitation corresponding to these gray bars. And on the left is cumulative change in groundwater storage. This is not good. From 1960 to 2000, it means we need to change the way we do things to slow this. So since most of you are geologists and environmental scientists, you probably know groundwater storage, what groundwater storage is. So this TB is Turale Lake Basin, and this is the average for the Central Valley. And you can see there is a general trend. Now you have some wet years where the groundwater recovers, but overall the trend is downward. Now here in the Sacramento Valley, and to some extent the Delta and the East San Joaquin, the trends are not dire. You can see we're averaging about zero change in groundwater storage. So the problems are more severe as you go farther south. Yes?
How do you describe, what is the basis for the differentiation of the northern part basically maintaining a mean and the southern part dropping precipitously?
It's an issue of rainfall. We tend to get more rainfall in the Sacramento Valley than they do in the Turale Lake Basin.
There's probably more water storage in the northern half of the state.
Yes, we tend to have more water.
Shasta and Oroville.
Yes, we also have a lot of surface water too. But we have a lot more precipitation than they do. And you can sort of see that here. This is precipitation in cubic kilometers. The scale is not showing here, but it's not in depth. So what should we do? Should we stop farming? No. But we need to manage our resources in a more sustainable way. So the two major problems, from my point of view, are this issue of groundwater overdraft and groundwater quality. So groundwater overdraft is when we pump water beyond the sustainable yield of an aquifer. And then groundwater quality deteriorates if we add chemicals to groundwater. So this map shows, this is a map from the California Department of Water Resources, and this should be purple. I don't know what color it's showing up as. These are the basins or watersheds that are already overdrafted. A big chunk of the Central Valley, this is the Central Valley here, and almost half of it is already overdrafted. And we have a law called Sigma. I don't know if anybody has heard about Sigma. It is saying that these basins have to be regulated almost immediately because they are already classified as overdrafted.
What's the definition for overdrafted?
Overdraft is when you're pumping, the way Sigma defines it is if your amount of water you're taking out is more than the amount of water that is going in all the time. So, which eventually leads to the issue of overdraft. Basically, your average storage going down.
So
The reason we don't have many watersheds here in the Sacramento Valley is we get more rain to recharge our aquifers.
In the purples, the southern purple, correct me if I'm wrong, that's where most of the subsidences occurred?
Yeah, because they have lost their porosity and stuff.
And Kesterson
Yes.
is there also.
Yes.
Isn't it?
So from here in the Turale Lake Basin and part of the San Joaquin River Basin, and a few areas along the Central Coast. So what happened during the drought is growers would just put in deeper wells, pump water. The problem though is this map on my right shows areas in the United States where irrigation is practiced. You may not be able to see it, but the blue is a dot, and one dot is about 10,000 acres. And this means that in the US, most of the irrigated agriculture is in the Central Valley, in the Mississippi River Basin, and the Ugalala Aquifer region here, and a little bit in Idaho and Utah. So most of the tree crop production is down here, but this is the area that is corresponding to overdraft, which is not a good thing. So we need to find more sustainable ways to continue to grow. If you grow walnuts or almonds, you tend to get more yields down there. Does anybody know why we tend to get better crops in the southern San Joaquin than we do in the Sacramento Valley? So you tend to get higher, there's a process we call evapotranspiration, which is basically, there's almost a linear relationship between biomass production and evapotranspiration. It's much hotter down there, so crops can easily transpire. So you can convert CO2 and water much more easily into dry matter, create yield.
What is that basin down by the Salton Sea, the one standout?
Is that the Imperial Valley?
Yeah.
This one?
No,
Yes.
further south.
Oh, yeah.
That one, yeah.
I can't see it very clearly, but
Must
it's
be the Imperial Valley.
very close to Imperial Valley. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Or like Elsinore is.
Which one?
It's where Lake Elsinore is.
Like us.
So it's like Riverside County area.
Where it goes.
Interesting. I've actually never been down there. So that's one problem where we're actually reducing the amount of water we have in storage. The other problem is quality. So this map shows nitrate contamination in groundwater. What is the limit? Does anybody know the EPA limit in drinking water? That is around
45 milligrams per liter.
Okay. So there's a safe amount that we shouldn't exceed in our groundwater for people to use it as a source of drinking water. The problem though is if you look, the red means that we are really exceeding the allowable limit. So the red and the yellow, where are they concentrated? Again, down in the southern part of the valley. So what do we do? Where does the nitrogen mostly come from that is contaminating the aquifers? It's a non-point source pollution, mostly from fertilizer. It could come from septic tank or other point sources, but majority of it is from applying fertilizers. So you have a double problem. You have a water quality problem here in the San Joaquin River Basin and the Turale Lake Basin, and you also have an overdraft problem. But you have thousands of acres of high value crops down here. And so the state has also implemented another policy. I don't know if anybody in the room has heard about a policy called the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, in which the growers will start eventually to submit to the state their nitrogen budgets per season. Again, and the idea is to get to this issue of nitrate contamination.
Right, so is that based on the fertilizer that they apply, or based on well concentrations?
It's really based on, it's a mass balance. So for a given crop, if you know the yield, there's usually a factor that you multiply with the yield to estimate how much nitrogen was removed. And then you know what you put in. So the balance between what you put in and what you removed is potentially what is left that could be leached.
Don't they already do that in places like Nebraska?
Yeah, but I don't think none of the other states, at least at the moment, is requiring the growers to submit to comply. But the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Board is going to require this. In fact, they're already doing so through coalitions.
Well, that sounds like a lawyer's dream to me.
It's suddenly creating a lot of jobs for consultants. So to address the issue of overdraft, the state of California passed in 2014 what they call the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And this act did a number of things, but one of the major ones was it gave local agencies authority to manage groundwater. Now, the state can still come in if the local agencies fail to do their job. So right now, there is creation of what they are called GSS, the Groundwater Sustainability Agencies, and they have to create what are called GSPs, or the Groundwater Sustainability Plans, which are submitted to DWR, or the Department of Water Resources. And the law says that you have to prioritize the basins that are overdrafted, and it gives a 20-year timeline. We are almost already 5 years into that. So there's really not much time to solve these issues. But really what is going to impact growers is this law gave these local agencies the authority to require registration of wells, or impose fees, or monitor. Some of these things can be contentious. A lot of growers don't want to come in on their property and start measuring how much water they are pumping. So, no, I am not aware of any of the GSAs that has gone to this extent yet, but within the framework of the law, they can do that. So this policy, the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, goes to address the quality issue of groundwater. Let me ask the students. Well, if I had a well on my property and I drank water that had high levels of nitrogen, or if I had a baby and fed them that water, what would happen? What's the disease? No? Huh? Yes, he's given you the answer. Blue baby. So just be careful in future when you get children. Make sure you have a safe drinking water source. So the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Board passed this water quality order, which says you cannot pollute groundwater or surface water. The law was first passed in 2003, mostly addressing surface water, but groundwater was added in 2012. And the new things that have been added is this idea of submitting a nitrogen management plans. Now what the growers did was instead of each individual preparing their forms and sending it to Sacramento, they hired what they call coalitions. And so the growers pay coalitions. Coalitions are groups of consultants that prepare these forms on behalf of the farmers and then submit these to the regional water quality boards.
Who pays them?
The farmers pay a fee, I think it's $5 per acre.
But the farmers make the payment.
Yes, the coalitions collect a fee from their members who are the farmers to pay the consultants that are helping them with the compliance.
That has kind of a distinct odor, doesn't it?
Yes, and we have actually quite a number of coalitions in the state. These are the different coalitions, at least in the Central Valley alone. I am working with a few here in the southern San Joaquin, helping them develop models to assess nitrate leaching, because the issue was the consultants had to put in groundwater observation wells or had to develop something else that was acceptable to the state. Putting groundwater monitoring wells for nitrates or groundwater level would have been a massive undertaking, too expensive. So what they have done is to use models. So we are working with them to develop a model called SWAT, which is Soil Water Assessment Tool, which is somewhat semi-mechanistic. And it simulates the nitrogen balance and the soil water balance for the entire Central Valley. So you can put in a management practice and simulate what effect that management practice would have on nitrate leaching, for example. So again, the growers are not complying on a farmer-to-farmer approach, but they are organizing themselves in coalitions to comply with the state laws. So we have looked at two problems so far. One was the overdraft issue. The second was the nitrate contamination issue. But we haven't talked about the problem of salts. So there is something else called the Central Valley salts, which is basically Central Valley salt salinity alternative for long-term sustainability. The State Water Board, I'm using these terms loosely. I'm assuming you're familiar with this, where water is managed in California. The State Water Board and its partners have realized the threat that salinity could have on the way of life in the Central Valley and its economy. So this is not a policy, but it's more of a partnership to address the issue of salinity. again, like overdraft and nitrate contamination, salinity tends to be a much bigger problem in the southern part of the Central Valley than the north. So they have issues down there.
That's part of their geology.
Yes, it's partly their geology, because you can pump water that's 10 decisiemens per meter, and it's just the geology. It's nothing almost you can do about it.
It's got high salinity and high
Sodium.
sodium,
So-
and then you've got selenium.
So some places have seleniums, a few areas also have uranium. But the ones that really hit you in terms of crop production are sodium, because it cuts off the infiltration, and then the salinity limits root water uptake. And they have all these problems down there.
You also, you don't have to go back to it, but in an earlier slide, you were showing by the basins overdraft, and there were a few on the coast.
Yes.
And are they seeing a major salinity incursion like you would on other ocean margin?
Yes, they have salinity problems there, but mostly due to seawater intrusion. They have a separate order than the Central Valley order, but in a lot of basins now you cannot put in a well. Actually, some of them are going to recycled water reuse, such that they keep a slight hydraulic head to push the salts back. So the Central Valley salts basically facilitates collaboration between the policymakers and the farmers and private industry. Unlike the other policies, this policy also, this is not a policy but a partnership, involves cities. They are also stakeholders. And CBO salts also funds projects that are addressing issues of salinity and nitrate leaching. So this is a quote from one of the meetings of the CV salts, which really speaks to how concerned people are. The Central Valley faces a future where raising salt levels threaten to turn this productive basin into a land where water is not fit to drink and land not capable of producing crops. Do you remember anywhere in history where this happened and it destroyed an entire civilization? Anybody knows? Huh? Yes, right in Mesopotamia.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. That's when they came up with the concept of the tells.
Yes. So we need to act fast before we get to a dire situation like that. So that's a brief overview of what some of the issues that are affecting water and how they potentially would affect crop production and sustainability of agriculture in general. And now I want to change gears a bit and talk about some of the research projects that my student and postdocs are working on. Yes.
My question might be appropriate at this point. You were explaining how Sigma works 10 minutes ago. And you made the comment that local agencies determine how groundwater is going to be pumped, if I understood it correctly. And then you said that there was some kind of a mechanism that was available in case the local agency made inappropriate decisions. I didn't quite understand that, and I wonder if you could expand on it a little bit.
Within the law, there is a section that says that if the groundwater sustainability agencies have a 10-year implementation planning and implementation plan where they have to attain sustainability. And largely sustainability is defined by not exceeding the aquifer yield. So if GSAs fail to hit that goal, the state may come in to help them.
They send what in?
The state.
Who does?
The state may come in to help them implement a more sustainable plan. Really, I think all of them are working hard. They don't want to get to that point. They want local agencies to drive the process. But just in case there's a GSA that just decided not to do anything.
I have one branch of my family farms over on the west side of the valley from here, and although they are very concerned with having a sustainable aquifer underneath their own property, they're concerned that some of their neighbors are pumping water to send to Los Angeles right now, and they don't know how to protect themselves from their own neighbors. And it's not clear to me how concerned they should be about that.
That has already been an issue, because groundwater is a shared resource. And sometimes people have different goals. I'll give you this joke. When I was working in the high plains, some farmers would tell me, I'm going to pump it and leave. And others would tell me, I want my children and great-grandchildren to stay here. And these were neighbors. Harmonizing their differences was very difficult. And it's the same thing in the southern part of the valley. We have mechanisms where you can do water transfers, where you can sell water. Some people want to sell water, others want to grow crops. But an issue like that would be addressed through the GSA mechanism.
I don't want to belabor the point. I just wanted to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, but that's a good question. Yeah.
You had mentioned that the problem with increasing salinity of the soil layer is because of the inability of the plants to take up water because of it doesn't, the high salt content doesn't poison the plants itself. It's access to water. Did I understand correctly?
So there are two issues. There is the issue of sodicity and then the issue of salinity. So the issue of sodicity, and unfortunately our water has both in some parts of the state. Sodium causes dispersion, so it breaks the structure and causes all the mineral particles to be independent. Basically it seals the surface. So if you've walked in some orchards, the grower is irrigating, but the water is running everywhere. The water is not getting into the soil because the surface is sealed because of sodium. The issue of salt, which is salinity, is basically the crop has to work to pull water. If there's a lot of salts in the water, in the soil, actually the salts would pull water from the plant, and the plant would. That's the reason we don't irrigate with Pacific Ocean water unless we desalinate it. If you put it in a container, the water that has a lot of salt will pull it from the cells of the plant and it will die.
I have a question, and that is, there is a real delicate balance between transevaporation and the amount of water that you put on the land, plus the salinity problem where you develop caliche layers.
Yes.
And so the question is, in my mind, you really need to educate the farmers because they're just pouring water on it, and as long as it's available to them, they'll continue to do that.
Yes.
So, and in the south part of the valley that has high salt, low water sources are the ones that really have to flush the salts out of the system.
That's another dilemma, because one of the quick solutions if you have a lot of salts is you over-irrigate. You kind of reduce the concentrations, but they don't have a lot of water. They're already overdrafted. Maybe we need to figure out a way of sending more water down there. But a lot of people don't like that. So, now I'm going to talk about what some of my students are working on. I have a student called Kelly Dressler, and she's looking at evaluating independent irrigation management of different almond varieties within the same orchard. So there is a group called the Almond Board of California, and it has four or five sustainability goals. And one of their sustainability goals is to reduce the amount of water used to grow a pound of almonds by 20%. So it gave us some money to do a project to help them figure out how they could reduce water to grow almonds. And if anybody farms almonds here, you probably know this better than me, but each almond orchard has at least 2 or 3 varieties to achieve effective pollination. So you have non-paro, which is a very common variety, and then you could, in our experiment, we had Butte and Aldrich, but you could have Monterey or other varieties. So you plant your big variety and then you alternate like that. The challenge though is all these crops do not grow at the same rate over their life cycle during the season. That's why they actually harvested at different times. For example, the non-paro is harvested in August, and the pollinators sometimes are harvested as late as September. So there are opportunities there to manage each variety independently. The problem though is the growers have already installed the system to manage everything the same way. So it will be expensive to retrofit. So that's what we are trying to address. And even if we just saved 5%, we have over 1.5 million now acres of almonds. So that could be a significant reduction. And the value of almonds now has already exceeded 5 billion. So it's an important crop. I don't know if you could see this picture clearly, but if you went into an orchard during bloom, you would see some trees have already flowered and others are still behind because they're growing at different rates. And what that means is they're going to go through their life. This is the life cycle of an almond crop. It blooms, it goes through kernel development, house plant, harvest, and bud depreciation. Why it is important to understand these stages is because these stages respond to water differently. So for example, we want to irrigate a lot and don't stress here, and we don't want to stress here, but we want to stress at what we call hull split. Hull split is when the hull splits. And the reason we want to do that is we reduce disease if we stress them slightly. We call it regulated deficit, and they're also easier to shake off the tree. And we could benefit maybe 5% or 10% reduction in seasonal water use. Wow. And so this is our experiment. It's in Albaco, about an hour south of here. And the other thing that is interesting is, unlike other crops, you need to irrigate almonds after you harvest them, because the buds that are going to create the fruit for the next season are set around August. So if you stress it that time of year, then that will impact your crops, your yield the next season. But a lot of growers can't do that. The few have started because they have nuts on the floor during harvest and they don't want to wet. You don't want to wet the nuts on the floor. But if you have drip irrigation, for example, we have double row drip here. We could shut down one side, open the other side, and still able to irrigate the tree. These are just examples of dates that are showing you that these processes are different. You can see here the hull split finished in August 6th. And for this variety, this is a French variety. This is a French wild non-paro. And this you can see the dates of the other pollinators are different. If the agricultural part is boring, yeah, I can go through it differently because I know all of you are environmental scientists and geologists.
I have a question. Can you modify the crop by grafting onto a root system that will be more efficient at picking up water, and you only have to put a percentage of water, you can reduce the percentage of water used?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, my colleagues are studying different types of rootstocks to find out which ones are more tolerant to water stress and salinity yet. But to my understanding, water is a tough one. I'm not sure they have figured out one that would use less water.
The reason I bring it up is because one of our former students was a farmer, and basically we live out on the grasslands to the north of us. And he said that there is now a Russian root that you can graft onto almonds, and they'll survive under the conditions of the land that are there.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that. But a lot of studies that have attempted to do drought stress end up impacting yield. The crop may survive, but then the efficiency in terms of converting light and CO2 into dry matter reduces. But that is certainly would be an interesting area of research.
He works for a orchard company out of France, and I can't remember the name of it, but they have a business in Britain.
They are looking at this question?
Yes.
Yes, that's for sure. That's an interesting. If they can figure out a way to even reduce 20% of the water we are currently using to grow almonds, that would be significant. So these were the research question that the student had. She wanted to see if irrigating variety would improve yield, quality, and productivity. So water productivity is a measure of sustainability. It's basically how many inches you're using to grow a pound of almonds, in this case, and profitability. And also do an economic analysis to see what is the return on investment. So this is a fairly dense picture. I doubt you can see it, but this is the setup of our experiment. This is on a commercial research farm in Albuquerque. It's on 5 acres, and she had each block had each of the varieties, and she repeated the experiment replicated it 5 times. And the different colors are the different combinations of treatments. So they were stressed from 75% at house split to 50% at house split. So this is just a picture. This is a drawn image of NDVI to look at the orchard at the beginning of the season.
NDVI is what?
NDVI is a net. It's a vegetative index, net. I'm forgetting the acronym.
What does it give you, essentially?
It measures canopy density. I should know this, but the VI is a vegetative index. I actually know the mathematical equation.
It's a normalized difference.
Yes, a normalized difference vegetation index. Yes, I was going to write the equation. Yes. But it gives you how dense. Basically, what it does is crops, the chlorophyll in the crops, they like the near infrared, right? And so if we have a sensor that can measure red and near infrared from the canopy, we can calculate this index by simply normalizing it. So red minus the near infrared bar over the sum of the two. So she created something interesting. She came up with a way to remotely open and close these valves from Davis because she didn't want to drive 45 minutes every day to go open and close valves. So there are things called Arduino. Is anybody familiar with Arduino? Or you use them? You can play with them and do something that can turn a solenoid on and off. And so she's collecting biophysical information, so she has to go and take stem water potential. Stem water potential is a good indicator of plant water status. And she collects it using a neutron probe. And then she also, a pressure chamber, and then uses a neutron probe for soil moisture. Do you guys use a neutron probe? No?
There's a course in the environmental sciences where you do look at different kinds of probes and sensors and use Arduinos to build it. I'm not sure, depending on the semester, which probes they use in the projects.
Yeah, nobody's using neutron probe.
If you want to play with it, come to my lab. But I need to first get you a federal clearance. You need a badge because the reason it has an active radio source, radio neutron. It's very low radiation, but they force us to register.
I have a question that you just triggered. How can you differentiate between the hydrogen in the wood stock versus the hydrogen that's in the water?
That's an interesting question. It's going to take me into the weeds, but I'll come back to your question.
Okay.
We have another system which we call a cosmic ray neutron probe that also measures soil moisture, but it looks at fast-moving neutrons because it doesn't go into the soil, it sits above the ground. So it measures these cosmic rays that come from space. When they come near the near Earth's surface, they find hydrogen, which retards them, and that's the thing we measure. But what complicates life is the hydrogen in the canopy or the stalk, and hydrogen in the soil water, because that sensor only measures about 0.5 meter. So there's a group in Germany that figured out that you can actually find the signature of the water or the hydrogen from the soil is different from the water that's coming from water in the canopy, for example. So they can be separated. But to come back to this probe, it's in the soil. You have to lower it in the soil. And so the other thing she's measuring, this is data she gets from SEMES. SEMES is a California Irrigation Management Information System. It basically gives you ET. And she found some interesting results. She was actually, this graph here shows stem water potential varying over time. And she was noticing that there were some subtle differences in stem water potential between varieties. So meaning these varieties responded differently to the same amount of irrigation water. And there was also an interesting change that the stress reduced once you did the harvesting. So this is the yields that she found in 2018. These are her treatments, and this is yield in kilograms. Average count per kilogram of kernel, and average kernel weight. So this relates mostly to quality, and this relates mostly to yield. But the thing I want to call your attention to is there was no significant differences between stressing 75% or giving 100% ET, or even stressing 50%. Does it mean we can cut out water we use on almonds by 50%?
You
No.
sold up your soils though.
Yes. The reason she didn't see these letters mean there's no significant differences if the letters are the same. But however, this stars means if the stars are different, means there were significant differences across varieties. So no significant differences across the irrigation amounts, but there are significant differences across varieties. The reason she was not able to see differences at least in the first year, and I doubt she will see in the second year in 2019, is trees have carryover effects. So if you impose treatments this year, the trees has a memory of whatever the management has been 2 or 3 years before. So you need at least 4 years to see, on trees, to see a response. And the challenge is most grants are 3 years. So that is was a major difference, is there's potential for improving water productivity through irrigation by variety. And also this idea that after you harvest the non-paro, you can continue to irrigate the other 2 varieties and hopefully boost their yield.
But of course, this requires drip irrigation.
It requires drip irrigation. Now, I have seen growers actually, there's a grower I work with in Conning. What he's done, he has both sprinklers and drip. So during the season, he uses sprinklers, but after harvest, he goes to drip to allow him to do this kind of thing. I probably won't go into that detail. So I want to go to share with you another study that we are doing with a grower on farm. As you've noticed, that acreage in California of almonds has ballooned from 1 million to 1.5 million acres. And what that means is that a lot of good land is already either being taken or too expensive. So a lot of growers are now moving to marginal lands. Marginal lands are harder to manage because they are more variable. That they don't have those nice, deep, uniform profiles. And what that means is you have to manage them in a more intense way. This is one application of geology or geophysics in particular. We use electrical resistivity or electromagnetic induction to map fields to see differences in soil type. So at least there's one potential application in agriculture, like you guys study. So this is a map of something we call soil bulk electrical conductivity, and it's measured with an instrument called a Verus, which measures electrical resistivity. And bulk electrical conductivity can give you information about soil texture. So this grower has 1,000 acres, so 500 are in almonds and 500 are in walnuts. So what he's done is, there's a map that I went over maybe too fast. We went from bulk electrical conductivity, and if I'm using terms that you don't understand, please stop me. And then came to soil texture. So this is soil texture. So there are 2 ways you could approach this problem. You could try to manage each of these colors differently, or you could just put squares and try to manage those squares. So he actually started with this block here where he tried to install the irrigation to manage these very weird shapes of soil types, and he went away from that to just using uniform blocks. So he put a bulb. You can control each of these bulbs independently, and each color shows a different soil type, a dominant soil type. So he has light soils, he has heavy soils, and he has layered soils. And so the reason he called us is he told me that, okay, I have this orchard, and some parts of the field I'm able to harvest 3,000 tons per acre, and on some I only get 1,000. How can we raise the low-producing areas to even half of what the high-yielding area? On average, that would improve his bottom line. So that was our goal. And so we've been intensively monitoring that part of his ranch. So we have all these monitoring stations. We have a neutron probe access tube. We have soil moisture sensors. We were supposed to put stem water potential sensors, but that did not work out last season. And we also take weekly stem water potential measurements. And so these are what the soil water potential measurements looks like. So on the y-axis, you have below bars below fully irrigated. So we measure pressure. If you have a leaf or a tree, and the tree has a leaf, the tree is doing a certain amount of work X to pull water from the soil. So you can measure the amount of work the tree is doing by subjecting a leaf to a certain amount of pressure. And when water starts to come out of the leaf, that is equal to the amount of work the tree had to do to pull the water. And that number is shown here. So if there's no stress, it's around 0. In May, April, May, there's very little ET, so there's really no stress. So that's why all this, the blue is the heavy soil, the green is the layered soil, the red is the light soil. Everything is within about the same. But when you get into July, August, then you start seeing the differences in soil type, how the trees are responding differently. So that was almonds, and we're also on the same ranch working on walnuts, and pretty much doing the same thing. But on walnuts, we are trying something else. We are trying to develop a way to predict yield ahead of time by measuring light interception. A colleague of mine called Bruce Lampeni developed this. He had this, what are they called? These ATVs, and he put sensors on it, so he drives it under the orchard. These sensors measure light interception, so he knows how much light the canopy has intercepted. And he worked with growers all across the state, and they gave him their yields, and he was able to create a correlation of light interception and yield, which is a linear relationship. But the challenge is you don't have that instrument all the time, and so I asked one of my students to see if we can measure the same thing using a drone. So we had a few people on the ground measuring it the traditional way, and then flew a drone that had a multi-area spectral camera that was measuring in the visible and the near infrared region. And we were able to create a light interception map. So you can see that the blue here, the light interception is between 90 to 100. And if you come to this regression, you can see here the yield potential is about 4.5 ton. Yet here where you have yellow, the yield 40 to 50, your yield potential is almost half. So he can see where approximately how much yield he's going to get at the end of the season. Really our goal is to see if we can improve these bad areas, because what that would do is help us improve water productivity. Remember, water productivity is yield over crop water use. And so we want to increase that number. So we can do two things. We can either increase yield and keep the amount of water we're using the same, or keep the yield constant and reduce the amount of water we're using. So that is more of on a farm scale. I have a postdoc called Yael Hoffman. She did a PhD at Ben Gurion University in Israel, and she's helping me develop these models for the coalitions to help predict nitrate loading from management practices that their members are doing. So one of the questions we had is to compare two models. So this is a SWAT model, the Soil Water Assessment Tool. These are all hydrologic models. And what it does, it simulates things on a large scale. And when you simulate things on the large scale, you have to be parsimonious, which means you have to make your conceptual models simpler to reduce computational time. And so this model is one-dimensional, but it still does crop growth as well as nitrogen and carbon cycles. So we wanted to compare it to a much more scale or plot scale model called Hydras, because it's plot scale, you can afford to be elaborate in your conceptual model. So it solves a two-dimensional model called Hydras, Richard's equation. Geologists need to know Richard's equation. Have you heard about Richard's equation? No? or environmental scientists. So that model can help us. This purple thing here is a drip line, and this is a bed. You know, this is tomatoes. So tomatoes are grown on beds, and this is a finite element mesh. So if we define the boundary conditions, our drip line here becomes a flux. So it becomes a boundary condition, which means we can predict water or nitrate concentration anywhere within this bed. It would take a lot of computer power for me to do this for the entire Central Valley. The goal was to, what is the error if I compare this to a much more simplified landscape scale model? And so if we look at discharge or leaching, the amount of water going below the root zone, there's actually no difference between 2D and 1D. So they're pretty much very close. This is a one-to-one line for different soil types. And you can, even if you look at the probability distribution functions, they are pretty much the same. However, if it comes to nitrates, it's a little bit different. You can see that they have differences between the salt and hydrous model. Because drip irrigation is, water is not only one dimension, it's also moving sideways, and it's moving nitrates on the side. So a one-dimensional model is not able to capture those details. And so if correlations only rely on one-dimensional model, there may be uncertainty. That is basically what we are concluding here. And the other thing here is that we really need data to validate these models. There's not much data on nitrate leaching, yet there is regulation. We could develop all these models. One professor told me that if you only do modeling, that's fantasy, but if you only do data, that can also be chaos, so you need both. This is the final example of the work we are doing, and it relates to developing model-driven decision support tools. And this is another postdoc. Jason Kim is a civil engineer, and our challenge was we developed these complex models, but no farmer is ever going to use them. So how do we transfer them to the growers? Was the challenge. So what we did was to develop, we call the system FARMS, Food and Agricultural Resource Management System is the acronym. But the idea is you put your source code and even an executable on a server that can be called from anywhere where somebody has internet. And then you also automate the process of creating input files. So the farmer or a consultant just needs to go and ask what if type questions, and they can run the model. They don't need to know the complexities behind the model. So this particular model uses something called NASA Power. So NASA produces a product that gives you weather at least anywhere in the continental United States on a gridded basis. So you put in your longitude and latitude, and you can go to, I think, 1979 to yesterday, and it updates. And then we use soil data from NRCS, and the code we are running is DSAT, or Decision Support System for Agrotechnology Transfer. I won't go into this unless there's somebody in the group that does software development, but this is the software architecture. The key thing I want to mention here is all the tools we are using here are open source. And so there's no license or anything. And everything is programmed in Python. And so this is the user interface. This is a Sentinel image. And so the grower just needs to do a boundary on their field, and then once they demarcate the boundary, then the tool will go and call the soil type for their field and the weather. And then it will run the simulation. Really, the thing they interface with is their management. Go through this. So this is just an example of the information they need, and these are some of the outputs they can get. You can predict yield at any time during the growing season. You can produce nitrate leaching. You can predict nitrate leaching. I'm going ahead of time, that's why I'm going very fast. Thanks. Any questions? Yes.
You had mentioned early on that like even efficient irrigation systems may cause like excessive salts in the soil.
Yes.
Would drip irrigation be one of those types of systems? Or?
Yes. Because with drip irrigation, when we used to irrigate a lot with surface irrigation many years ago, we had a lot of opportunity to leach. But with irrigation, we put on little amounts, and we're really building, the way drip irrigation works, it pushes the salts on the edge of the wetting valve. It keeps the little area around the roots not as saline, but you build salts up over time. So what growers in the Central Valley, mostly in the southern San Joaquin, are seeing, they are seeing high nitrate concentrates on the edge of the bed because the roots can't take it. They are applying nitrogen, it's there, but the root can't take it because the salinity on the edges is much higher than the center.
There has to be like a balance between how much drip irrigation you use on an orchard and
what I've seen some growers do is you can recharge, do groundwater recharge if you have the water in the winter. It's flood the field.
Before we go, because it was great, thanks. Todd's going to give a quick announcement, and then if folks want to stay after in particular, I think it would be a great opportunity to talk to somebody from a major research school and learn about grad school and maybe what his lab and others are looking for.
Yep, sorry, this actually might interest you as well. On Sunday, November 10th, California Water Stories, and I got a little thing here, can you see it? California Water Stories, and it's about documentaries of the Owens Valley, Sacramento Valley, and the San Joaquin Valley of water problems, water issues of California. And it's going to be, you can come see me if you want to take a look at it. We actually have one of them, these are 3 films from Jesse Dezard, one of our faculty in anthropology. But there's a panel discussion afterwards, and Dr. Jeff Davids will be one of those panelists. I'll be moderating, and there'll be a couple other local experts there as well. So this is Sunday, November 10th at the Chico's Women's Club, and starting at 3 o'clock. So if you'd like to get more information, let me know. Thank you very much, Bill, for your talk. Yes. Thank you for the talk.